Alright, this video is solving a quadratic using the quadratic formula. Alright, so the quadratic formula is the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. Now, the a's and the b's and the c's come from standard form of a quadratic, which is ax squared plus bx plus c. So whatever number is with the x squared is your a, whatever number is with the x is b, and then the number that stands alone is the c. So first example, let's go with x squared minus 5x plus 3 is equal to 0. All right, just like before, you have to make sure that it's equal to 0, which this one is. So we're just going to identify our a, b, and our c. All right, so the a is the number that's with the x squared. There's no number here, so we're going to say it's 1, because 1 times anything is that thing. The number next to the x is negative 5, so that's your b. And then the number that stands alone is the c, so that's 3. All right, all we have to do is plug it into the formula. The opposite of b, so b is negative 5, so the opposite of negative is positive, plus or minus. Now we talked about you have to have two answers because it's squared. So the plus or minus is what's giving you your two answers. B squared, b is negative 5 squared, minus 4 times 1 times 3. And this whole thing is over 2 times a, which is 1. Don't forget about the bottom part. A lot of kids forget the bottom. All right, the square root symbol is a grouping symbol, so we have to work this thing so we just have a number in there. So it's going to be 5 plus or minus. Negative 5 squared is a positive 25. If it's negative, your b, it's always going to be positive. And then negative 4, think of that as a negative, times 1 times 3 is a negative 12, or minus 12, all over 2 times 1, which is 2. You have to keep going until you get a number here. 25 minus 12 is 13. All right, so at this point, you have to determine whether you can simplify the square root of 13 at all, or if 2 can go into 5 and any number over here. And it can't, so this is your final exact answer. Don't plug it in your calculator, no decimals. This is an exact answer. It's a coordinate. You have two answers. So one answer is 5 plus the square root of 13 over 2, comma 0. And the other one is 5 minus the square root of 13 over 2, comma 0. Those are your zeros. All right, let's do another one. All right, x squared plus 8x is equal to a negative 11. All right, so the first thing we need to check is that it's equal to 0, which it's not. So we're going to add 11 so that I do have it equal to 0, and make sure you add it to both sides. Now you can't add 11 to the 8x because that has an x and that doesn't. So when you write it out, it's going to be x squared plus 8x plus 11 equals 0. And everything kind of has to go in order. Like your x squared is first, and then your x is second, and then your 11 is by itself. Not too much. All right, so we're going to plug it into the quadratic formula, and sometimes it helps to write it out again. It's easier and you're not going to miss anything. Opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2 times a. All right, so I'm going to replace my a is 1, My B is 8 and my C is 11. A, B, C. All right, so the opposite of B, which is negative 8, plus or minus B squared, so 8 squared, minus 4 times A, which is 1, times C, which is 11, all over 2 times A, which is 1. All right, so we got to end up with a number inside the radical here. So negative 8 plus or minus 8 squared is 64 minus 4 times 1 times 11, or a negative 4 times 1 times 11 is minus 44 all over 2. 64 minus 44 is what? 20 all over 2. Now, if you ended up with like a negative number, just kind of a side note, if it was 44 minus 64 and you ended up with a negative 20, there would be no solution. You couldn't go further. You can't find the square root of a negative number, so you would be finished, and your answer would be no solution. That's not the case in this, but just that could come up. All right, so this is an example where we're not quite finished yet because we can simplify the square root of 20, and 2 goes into 8, and I'll get to that in a minute, but let's come over here with square root of 20. Square root of 20. Looking for a factor of 20 that's a perfect square. 4 and 5. Now you can keep going down and know that 4 breaks down to 2 and 2, but the square root of 4 is 2, and 5 has no, you can't, so it stays under the radical. All right, negative 8 plus or minus 2 square roots of 5 all over 2. So when you divide it all over 2, you have to, the 2 can go into 8 and 2. You cannot simplify it with just the 8 and not the 2. It has to go to both pieces. Like this is a whole top. So 2 goes into negative 8, negative 4 times. 2 goes into 2 one time. You can write 1 if you want. Square root of 5. That's our answer. We need to write it as a coordinate. So it's negative 4 plus the square root of 5, comma 0. And then negative 4 minus the square root of 5, comma 0. All right, the most important part is that you just stay really careful. Use a whole page if you need to, but make sure you don't miss any negatives and you're just kind of giving yourself lots of room so you don't make little mistakes. All right.